getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, stepping outside that comfort zone. It's essential. And in any walk of life, we're talking from a player welfare perspective, then to have a player care officer that looks at the onboarding processes and also the offboarding processes, how that player can transition to life after football. It's tough. The mental battle that comes with that is really, really difficult. So to have something else to focus on and really get stuck into, I can't campaign for enough.
Welcome to Football Economy, the podcast where we basically take you through the ins and outs of the football industry. I'm Ibrahim, and today we're going to be speaking with Nathan Thompson. Nathan is a professional footballer with MK Dons, whose influence extends well beyond the pitch. He's a very vocal advocate for player development and career transition. He's helped reshape conversation around identity, retirement, and life about football when it comes to being a footballer in the English football leagues. Through his writing, public speaking, and forward-thinking ideas, Nathan is advocating for the bridging of the gap between the dressing room and also the boardroom. So trying to make sure there's a linear pathway towards that, empowering players to build meaningful futures alongside playing football. So Nathan, welcome to Football Economy.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So the first question I'd like to point at you is basically talking about your background as a up and coming footballer when you were 12 years old. What was the path towards being a footballer like? And how would you compare the current pathway for fledgling youngsters trying to become footballers?
I think I was quite fortunate. My dad was in the army, so we moved about quite a bit as youngsters, me and my brother, and that enabled us to play multiple different sort of styles of football growing up, playing on the continent in Germany, and then we moved back to the UK at say 12 years old. Within 6 months of playing for a local grassroots team, I was then scouted to go and trial at Swindon, and thankfully after 2 weeks there, I was sort of offered a contract, and it went from there. So that sort of grassroots element within the UK, I probably didn't have a huge amount of exposure to in that sense. But I look at now, and you see so much online around how young players are being recruited. We're talking sort of 6, 7, these sort of pre-development academies, and I guess the competition just becomes even more intense. There's sort of one-to-one coaches that the players are having at such a young age, and I don't want to say it takes the fun away, but naturally it does put a huge amount of pressure on these young children. So I was probably shielded from that slightly, not growing up in that social media environment as such. But yeah, I've been very fortunate in the sort of opportunities that I've allowed, and maybe it's to sort of shape the career path that I've had today.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned a few things there, but let's talk about the transition that you're basically trying to make sure it goes very smoothly when it comes to transitioning from a football career to a sort of like a management career or an executive career. What's been the impression you felt from the industry itself when it comes to players trying to create that pathway, or resistance or stereotypes that you've faced? But also specifically, what can you tell us about what it takes to basically look yourself in the mirror and say, this is the transitional phase I'm in, and this is the path I want to take? How can a player come to those terms? What is the epiphany that has to take place, if there is one?
It's a tricky one. I think as much as you can shout from the rooftops about how important planning for the future pathway is, until a player maybe experiences setbacks such as injuries, such as not being involved for a long period of time within the team, I don't think they come to that realization. Naturally, the narrative has been players need to really focus on football, the here and now, and everything else can wait. And you're then sort of expected to transition into something without a huge amount of exposure to it once you finish football. So yeah, I've always sort of been an advocate for prior planning, and maybe as I've got older and the pressure from managers and others has not been maybe as intense because you're more of an experienced pro, you can start to plan. But thankfully, over the course of my career, it's slowly starting to change. You're seeing players become more than just footballers. And this is something that needs to take place, because when you pick up injuries and you're sort of on the sideline, it's tough. The mental battle that comes with that is really, really difficult. So to have something else to focus on and really get stuck into, I can't campaign for enough. From a personal perspective, I've tried lots of different things, whether that's my coaching. I've done my coaching badges. I've gone to university and done my master's in sports directorship, just simply because I probably didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So just having multiple strings to your bow. But what it enables is you to step outside your comfort zone. And probably within football, as much as the pressure that comes playing in front of 30, 40, 50,000 fans every week, that is your comfort zone because it's all you've known. But to do and build on skills that maybe you haven't done since you've left school, it's a daunting step, and it's just trying to encourage players to do that, because that's where growth takes place.
Yeah, that's where growth takes place. This is consistent across all industries, not least football. So I think you've mentioned or you've written about fractional twinning. So this is a concept that I think you're well versed in when it comes to player transitions. So for anyone who's listening to this who isn't familiar to this, could you break it down for us what this model entails and how does this work in football?
Yeah, well, so fractional twinning is obviously something is quite big in corporate life, where you're sort of pooling together the resources of different executives or different people within a business, so that there's sort of no knowledge gaps. You can give exposure to those that maybe develop them on that career ladder, and that they're getting sort of an understanding of how to become a leader, or how to sort of, yeah, develop sort of skill sets within that sort of. Whereas I see it within football is it's not something that's talked about, but I feel the understanding that players have within a dressing room, what makes a culture tick, and invaluable if you was to partner that with a director of football. And the director of football has maybe the business acumen, the understanding of how to work with agents and stuff like that maybe a player hasn't had the exposure to. But to bring the both parties together, I think would be really beneficial and powerful in that sense. It gives the player an understanding of what that looks like and the other side, whilst also being able to lean on the skills that they possess. And the thing is in football, because the jobs are so finite, it's being able to have the trust of those in more senior roles, because naturally they're constantly looking over their shoulder. There's not a huge amount of those jobs, so they're going to cling on to the dear life in that sense. But if you're able to partner the two, I just think that it's really beneficial. Right? And this is why I go back to planning for those future steps. It requires that player to step outside their comfort zone and go and spend time with the director of football, or that could be the commercial team, it could be the analytics team. There's so many different departments within the operate within a football club that marrying the two parties, I just think would be a powerful situation.
I mean, it's an interesting take. In terms of the implementation of this, do you think clubs are resistant to this idea because of maybe tradition, or do they lack the structural infrastructure that is required, and that's probably the barrier?
Possibly. I mean, I've just seen actually Reading is slightly different, but obviously with their new takeover, they've brought in Joe Jacobson, who's their now co-CEO and come from a footballing background, and they're possibly trying to marry the two up. And I do think that's important. The resistance, I don't know. Traditionally, yeah, it hasn't been done. So maybe they're not just forthcoming in suggesting it. Maybe you've not got players who know that these sorts of things exist. So, and then it goes back to what I was saying before about if a team are in a sticky situation, they're not winning games. Ultimately, then the manager looks at them as a distraction. And if they're just focused on off-field stuff and then not their actual performance on the pitch, then it's a perfect sort of excuse for them to say, well, why are you not focusing on what we're actually paying you for? So you maybe leave yourself vulnerable for a bit of criticism in that sense. It's why I'm trying to sort of speak about it a little bit more and try and get more of an understanding across the industry, and hopefully in years to come, the game has moved forward. It's receptive to players getting involved in certain ways. So hopefully in years to come that this becomes a little bit more received.
I mean, so I think in your experience, you face numerous challenges outside of the pitch when it comes to trying to transition into this other phase or post football in that sense. In terms of maybe applying for strategic roles around loan officer, loan manager officer, or, in that space, how would sort of like fractional twinning have eased your pathway in that sense? How would it have resulted in a benefit for the club if that was the case?
Yeah, I think from benefit from me in that sense, I think it would give me exposure to certain challenges. So when you look at a job interview, they'll or job sort of description, they'll talk about challenges off the pitch, so stuff that you maybe haven't experienced as a player. So then to transition from a player into those roles is difficult because unfortunately these roles come about and there's 100, 150 applicants for it. So computers naturally whittle out those that haven't had exposure to certain experiences that the job application is looking for. And I speak about it personally because it's probably about 2 years ago now. I was kind of told that I wasn't needed, I was going to be fifth choice and this sort of thing. So I started to look at what comes next and applied for a couple of roles within the industry, but naturally not playing anymore. And it was just something that didn't ever go anywhere simply because I guess the computer just passing by. And football is very much not what you know, it's who you know. And building relationships off the pitch, your network, and building on that network is so important. And again, it's something that I shout about because at times you need someone to open that door for you, and that's just a contact that you may have built those relationships with. So, but going back to the fractional twinning, I just think it gives you exposure to certain situations that these job roles require, and being able to do that whilst getting paid, but also being able to lend our experience as well and expertise within that. I just think it's really important.
Yeah, it's a well said point. And in terms of the clubs themselves, when you look back into your career, and currently, where have you seen sort of like that support in terms of the clubs itself or even the leagues that are trying to advocate for more support in terms of players trying to transition or trying to plan for transitions? Have you seen any sort of support in that sense? And if not, where do you think the opportunities for that sort of support would come from in either the league perspective or individual club perspective?
Yeah, I think I was very fortunate when I was at Peterborough. They were quite receptive to it. At the time, I was doing my masters, and there was multiple things that the masters required, and so different case studies and stuff like that. And they were really open to sort of sharing information, allowing me to come and try different things, and we would. So yeah, but I think it does require players to go out there and knock on the doors and speak to heads of certain departments. And I think if, truthfully, if a player come to him and said, "So I'd like to spend some time with you. Is there any way you would sort of allow me to take on a bit of a project?" I think most clubs would be receptive to it. There's no denying that. It just there needs to be an emphasis from the players on and taking ownership of this. And it is why I speak about it a lot because certain players get to 33, 34 worrying about what they've done next and they've had no exposure. Yet within a football club, you've not only got the different sort of departments within a football club, but you've also got all the sponsors attached to them as well. And they sort of made a couple of points on LinkedIn and the amount of doors that are open because businesses have sponsored clubs and they're happy for me to come and talk to them and understand that. So I say it's essential that as players we take ownership of that and harness those warm contacts that we've got because once you're on the other side of it, that becomes a lot more difficult.
It's true. Once you phase into that next path or phase in your life and you haven't planned for it, becomes very challenging and obviously comes with all the difficulties. But in terms of my question to you here is why do you think this sort of topic is not really taboo, but it's not really spoken of in terms of the emotional, psychological dilemma or toil that players are affected by when it comes to leaving the game? Why is this so under discussed in football circles?
I think it goes back to the maybe a nervousness from players to do stuff beyond that opens them up to criticism. You know what it's like. You make a mistake on the football pitch and you're naturally going to be vilified for it. In football, you get used to that. You understand that that's part and parcel of the game and you accept it. But if we're talking about something that you're trying to do beyond the football pitch, um, maybe there's a different level of critique to it, and it's maybe something that we don't want to open ourselves up to. And also, it's stepping outside that comfort zone that I've spoken about a lot. It's skills that we've not done in football. You naturally, as a player, you've always got people that are coming to you asking you questions and wanting to know what your daily schedule looks like, the day in the life of football. You see it now on any social media post and it blows up. For me to take ownership and go and ask questions to someone else that's in a different field, a different industry, and drive that relationship is a completely different skill set. And it's funny, you look at players in the dressing room and the characters and big characters you get, you take them out that dressing environment and stand them up at the front of a group and now say, right, present this analysis and opposition. And it's a completely different skill set. And you see players really go within themselves. So it's taking, as I say, ownership of those next steps, understanding what you want to do, and then going about finding the resources and the people you need to speak to in order to harness that.
Mm. And talking about being in a different environmental habitat, talking about taking ownership, I think you not too long ago joined Toastmasters when it comes to public speaking. I know Warren Buffett is probably an idol of yours. He's also advocated for public speaking lessons and trying to make sure you're able to communicate. There's a premium communication in that sense, and he mentions that he's benefited a lot from it. In your sense, in your perspective or your experience, what's been the biggest benefit from being able to experience Toastmasters?
Toastmasters is huge. I think communication is critical in every department, every industry. If you can speak well, if you can communicate in an effective way, people buy from you, people trust you, people believe in what you're saying. So no matter whether that's on the football pitch, I think as a leader, as an experienced pro, there's an importance for me to be able to deliver a message and everyone be like aligned with that. But then also once I finish football and I go into whatever industry, I then need to be able to do the same, articulate myself in a manner that comes across professional. And Toastmasters is quite similar to football in many ways, because after a game in football, you go into the lecture theatre at MK Dons as such, and we'll break down what went well, what went, what didn't, and go through it with a fine tooth comb in many ways. Toastmasters is similar because you have someone that is critiquing your level of the way you articulate yourself. So they'll have an and R counter, someone that's there purely to analyze and tally up how many filler words you will use during your speech. Now, it's not something that you think about unless you're told. You said or are 15, 20 times during that 2-minute piece. And when you become a lot more dialed in on it, you can start to exude a lot more confidence. You can pause for effect and know that you don't need to fill it with certain words. And I just think that by doing that, it just gives off such a more polished performance as such. So yeah, I just think it's been really, really important for me. And hopefully when I come to interviewing for jobs, whether the business that I'm sort of working on at the moment in time, by being able to communicate effectively, I just think it'd be really important for that.
I couldn't agree more with you on that point. And I mean, obviously, we're on a podcast now, and we're both speaking, so that speaks to what you're saying. In terms of in terms of sort of like responsibility when it comes to players trying to determine their path or the different pathways they want to take after football. In your opinion, who would you say is more, should be more responsible for this sort of like developmental lead? Is it the players themselves, like the players union, the clubs themselves, or potentially just the football industry as a whole?
It's a really good question. For me, I think all parties need to be more involved in it. I think from a union perspective, they'll say now we've set up a business school, and that is the perfect step for a player to go and get educated and go and understand what that next step looks like. But my argument and caveat to that is not everybody is educationally driven to go and sit in a lecture or to sit online and you've now got to write a 5,000 word, 10,000 word essay. And it isn't for everyone. And you only have to look at school and see that those that maybe thrived in football probably weren't the most academically in tune. So my argument is the onus courses should be on the player. You have to take onus of your career and what that next step looks like. But I just think more help can be done and more of a bespoke level of guidance in that sense. So rather than a one size fits all, the player sits down with the union rep, someone that from the union that's skilled in understanding what that career transition looks like, and just trying to unpick the skill sets and the capabilities of these players and go, right, well, you considered this or that. And players are passionate, they've got so much to contribute, but they don't know how to find it and to unpick it. And it needs sometimes someone that's, as I say, in tune with this sort of thing. So rather than it being one size fits all, become a lot more bespoke and have these conversations with players on a one-to-one basis. I think it's really important.
So I mean, with the football regulator, coming into play in a few, well, let's see how long it takes for it to be in effect. But David Corbyn being the one leading the charge, and he's going to elect a CEO of the regulatory board. What, in your opinion, if you were to like suggest sort of like policies or sort of like enforcements that could help shape better post careers for players, how would you go about sort of like, promoting this or policy, and what would this policy look like if you wanted to bring this to his attention?
It's funny. I think that EPPP, take it back to that, they brought in a player care welfare officer for all the academies. So anyone that has category 1, 2, 3 status needs a player care officer in. You get into a first team environment and that goes out the window. But yet you've still got young lads, 18, 19, 20, moving all the way across the country, having to settle into a completely new environment with no real help and support. And yet you're expected to go out and play on a Saturday to the best of your ability without anyone really caring the sort of mental state that that player had been in prior to that. And that doesn't change when you get to the end of the career. The worry and the fear that perpetuates in the player's minds from probably January to the end of the season, if you know you're out of contract, is horrible. I've been in that situation. You're going into games kind of wanting to showcase what you're about, but at the same time thinking, I just cannot afford to get injured. And as a player, that means you're probably not as dynamic as you want to be in case you pull a muscle. You're not going into tackles in the same way. So if people are coming in, I know there's sort of regulators probably more around sustainability within football and how clubs can be more sustainable. And this probably goes against that because you're asking for additional costs and additional staff in that sense. But if we're talking from a player welfare perspective, then to have a player care officer that looks at the onboarding processes and also the offboarding processes, how that player can transition to life after football, I just think would be critical, not only for the performance of that player on the pitch, but their mental state. And that can only be beneficial for the club if they're in the right frame of mind.
I mean, a different take or even an additional take to that would be you want to make sure there's a continuous flow of talented footballers and families who want to support that talent to be pushing industry. But if there are more stories that are coming into the fray, that clubs churn out players, academy players that don't make it, or even players that have had successful careers that don't end up being able to have a smooth transition to civilian life in that sense, it will become a sort of like an epidemic that would actually start to hurt football recruitment later on in the future. So because we live in a different generation, so it's in the best interest of clubs. You mentioned cost. It's actually a cost. If it's actually in the best interest of a club if they're taking that into consideration as opposed to looking at the short-term cost of it. So
I think you hit the nail on the head, Ibrahim. The problem you have is that as a club, you can't quantify the impact of a player care officer. Whereas if I bring in a set piece coach, for example, you only have to look at maybe the impact on us. There's a direct correlation between the set piece coach and the training that he's doing, and then on the match day, the results from that. The player care officer, psychologist, whoever it is within that role that's helping those players, they can't quantify the impact they're having on the match day. And ultimately, as a club, they go, well, is that a cost that we need to take on? We constantly hearing that clubs are running at multi-million-pound losses year on year. well, this is another X amount of year salary that they're going to have to absorb. And in their mind, they see it as, well, not seeing the direct correlation between the two. So, whilst I couldn't agree more with you, and it's a long-term mindset that you need to take, football's really not a long-term game in that sense. It's very much here and now, results driven, and we'll think about that down the line. So, yeah, it's trying to marry the two up.
Yeah, it's a fair point, and I think the issue the football industry faces is that it's almost like a paradox, because the sport itself, you could argue, there's no like empirical evidence to suggest that sporting success actually correlates with financial success of a club. So there's no evidence to suggest that buying so much players would eventually guarantee you, sorry, winning so many trophies would eventually guarantee financial success. It's not been proven, so it's the same lens. Clubs have to actually look at the long-term effects of this, just for the sake of the industry itself. But transitioning into sort of like you mentioned, mental state and mental or player welfare, this is going to be sort of like a big topic as we go deeper into other parts of the sports industry, as sports becomes a more financialized asset going forward. What's your sort of perspective when it comes to being a current player and a player that is thinking about what the industry would offer for him after he retires? Hopefully that's in a distant future. What's your perspective on what sort of like struggles players are currently facing, besides thinking about career planning, but the day-to-day of being a footballer outside of the pressures that we are well aware of?
I think it must be about 7, 8 years ago that the PFA come out with psychological help and helpline that you could call, and the PFA would fund around 10 to 12 sessions for a player of, as I say, help speaking to a psychologist. That helpline, those services were so in demand. For some reason, that shocked the PFA. But it just shows you that the pressures day to day that players are facing, and because they're earning good money, it's like they should be exempt from that. They shouldn't be able to feel like that simply because your job's not that strenuous, you earn good money, you've got all this time with your family. I don't know what you've got to worry about. The pressures of being a player, the pressures of being injured and being isolated from a team, the pressures of being able to put food on the table at the end of the season if you're out of contract, all these things are constantly ticking away. And I'm not saying that other people don't experience that and they can't experience it, but footballers are not exempt from it, and it is difficult. And thankfully, people are speaking about it more now, and you see in podcasts and lads opening up and understanding that these are the challenges that they faced. And I've spoken on 1 or 2 podcasts recently about the struggles that I've had transitioning, moving from clubs and being injured and feeling that isolation. It isn't easy, and there is definitely a need for these services. Players are constantly finding that they're going through these mental challenges and battles, and that's not getting easier. I think now that we're probably more in tune with it, people are speaking about it more. You're seeing the demand for the services increase ever so much. So yeah, I think I've digressed a little bit from your conversation. I'm trying to think actually the main point of your question, but it is something it is a bit of a concern.
And do you think we're finding that these crops of current players are more accepted, or is more accepting of players sharing their struggles, or is that still not currently being done in the football industry?
It's a tricky one, because as much as I think we're more aware of mental health now and there's more support for you out there, as a player, you still feel vulnerable in the sense that if I go and say that I'm struggling mentally, is the manager going to be able to trust me? And ultimately, they can't trust me. Are they going to play me on a Saturday? And then that just perpetuates, because if I'm not playing Saturday and that continues for a sustained period of time, am I going to get a contract? And it's that constant battle that as players you face all the time. I think as an experienced pro myself now, I can speak about it simply because maybe you're not as concerned about those repercussions. But as a young player, the thought of opening up to whoever it is within the football club is daunting, because if you are out of contract and you've not played a huge amount of games, then unfortunately you end up falling by the wayside, and football moves on.
It's a reality of the sport industry. It's a dog eat dog industry. It's actually one of the few industries that still do not accept any sort of like balance when it comes to being, being human and being very competitive. It's like a one gear sort of like industry, and there are benefits for that because obviously there's a commercial revenue that's generated. Players are well off, and it depends on where in the industry, where in the leagues you are. But in terms of actually looking at them as human beings as opposed to assets in that sense, we're far off from where we need to be.
A million miles away. And as much as we talk about it and we talk about the different campaigns that we're running and that sort of thing, you hit the nail on the head. It's such a competitive environment that if you're not performing, there's someone's always there to replace you. So you cannot afford to take a backward step in that sense. And that's why players are not prepared to sort of be vulnerable or show vulnerability.
So I mean, so I would say like, let's say we're in this situation where you're giving advice to a crop of academy players who are about to break into the first team, and you look back into your life, you reflect on what you've been through, the ups and downs, the highs, the lows. What sort of advice would you be giving to these crops of players about how to make sure they are not just financially set when their career is over, but mentally set in terms of having a new purpose? We see players like Ronaldo prolonging their careers because obviously they're driven by more accolades, but at the same time they're driven by the fear of the unknown. Even if he's financially well off, he's well aware of he's well aware of the fact that he won't have the same purpose that he currently has. So that's going to be an issue for any industry, specifically any sports industry. What sort of advice would you be giving to these players?
I'd say you're more than just a footballer. I think we're pigeonholed into believing that that's our whole identity, that you've grown up from whatever. For me, it was 12 when I joined Swindon, but as I said, you get 6-year-olds now that are signing for pre-development teams, and they believe that their whole identity is based on just being a footballer. I'd say to them, listen, you're more than that. You're Nathan Thompson, Joe Bloggs, whoever that plays football. And taking that on, you need to work on other skills away from the pitch, whether that's communication, whether that's your relationship building. You are in a privileged position at the moment in time whilst we're in football. You do earn good money, but you've also got some time on your hands to go and harness the relationships that clubs have with other business, other sectors. Find out what you're passionate about and go and spend time with those that offer those services. And you've got use that period of time between now and when you retire to build a sort of a expertise bank as such, that when you look to transition, you've got that behind you. I think by being able to take a little bit of control, it allows you to be free in your mind. And that's the most important thing that we ask. You're not sort of at every club's beck and call. You can call time in your career when you want, rather than the sort of game dictating it to you. And I think me going back to university and learning to step outside my comfort zone was one of the most important lessons that I've learned during my career. It's such an important skill set to be able to be comfortable being uncomfortable as such.
Yeah, and this is a mindset that needs to be taught to the next generation for them to have a very effective career, but also post playing career. So, I mean, looking forward into the future, let's say you've achieved what you're trying to achieve. What would be the sort of the milestones you want to look back and say you're well proud of following this path, and you can say that you've done what you set out to achieve?
If I'm truthfully honest, within football, of course, you always aim to get promoted and to have that sort of tangible success as such. But it's such a competitive environment, and to have played for 17 years in this sport, whether that's Championship, League Two, whatever, that makes me extremely proud. I think the next 2 years, of course, I'll continue to try and to build on the pitch stuff, but my aim as well is to really sort of harness the off the pitch stuff now. So I'm in the process of co-founding a business that helps small and medium enterprises grow, and also continue to build on the relationships that I have within football clubs. And you don't know where that sort of takes as such, but I'm already proud of what I've achieved within football. Of course, you always like to add to that. And when it comes to retire, if I could have had a couple more promotions, then perfect. But I've achieved what realistically I set out to achieve. And going forward now, it's understanding what comes next and making sure I'm prepared physically and mentally for those next steps as well.
And in terms of like people you sort of like, sort of like model your career, well, your post-life career, post-football career over, would you consider something that Gary Neville is currently doing, or something
Exactly.
that you'd ideally want to not have the same sort of like ideal path, because he does very different things from broadcasting to podcasting to obviously his other ventures. But in that sense, where he says, I want to have my post-football career become even bigger than my actual football career, is that something that you're looking towards also?
100%. And that's something that I've said to my wife multiple times that is a real goal of mine, is that the next step, the next chapter of this looks um, even more when I reflect in years to come, I go, actually was just as successful as I was within the football industry. So yeah, Gary Neville's someone I've idolized for quite some time. He was a right back like myself, and um, but the fact that he had so much going on off the pitch, you can clearly see that it didn't have an impact on him. He was able to maximize his talent on the pitch as well. So it just sort of puts paid to all those arguments that you have to only have a singular focus. And yeah, that's ultimately the aim. And it may be slightly different in terms of the line of work as such, the different industries, but definitely keen to ensure that that next step's just as fruitful.
Then you come across as to me as someone who's very passionate about, future-proofing player welfare, but also post-playing careers. Would you consider something yourself like creating some sort of like infrastructure or community that you believe would be effective in terms of providing the necessary support, but also necessary change the industry requires in terms of player transition?
Yeah, I think I've had multiple conversations with people within the space, and there's some fantastic businesses that are trying to start it up and to advocate for that sort of support for those players. I think truthfully, and it may be something that I do in due course, is get into that industry and try and help. I think realistically, the union are the one that have to drive this. They've got the players here. They are in clubs on a day-to-day basis. They've got the delegates that go in and ensure that those players' concerns are listened to. So for me, it's those that have to really drive this situation home. And I'd love to be able to offer some sort of support or guidance or mentoring or whatever that looks like in due course. But realistically, they're the ones that have to make this a reality, and they represent the players in fantastic ways and pension and all these different benefits that they offer. But I do believe that they could possibly do a touch more around their sort of post career.
Wow. Okay. Well said. So now we'll phase into the rapid fire section of this conversation, and this will be a bit more extended. So if I was to ask your younger self, what ideal sort of football career would you be looking to have? Would you say that you've achieved that right now?
Yeah, I think ultimately, naturally, every player wishes that they had played in the Premier League. If I'm truthful, a couple more seasons in the Championship would have been ultimately my aim, and then if a little promotion to the Premier League would have been perfect. But to play for 17, 18 years as a professional is something I'm extremely proud of. So I'm certainly very grateful for that.
Okay. One thing you wish you knew 10 years ago.
The worries, the concerns, just actually no, I don't like that. It's a good question. Just take ownership. Take ownership of everything. Your next step. Don't leave it in the hands of others. And for a long time, I was kind of reliant on a manager or a director of football to sort of lead me on that next step. But I think being out of contract and feeling extremely vulnerable was really important for me. And yeah, I wish I knew that everything would work itself out. That's certainly something that was, yeah, I'm pleased with.
If I ask you now if you've read this book by Jacko, Extreme Ownership, are you familiar with it?
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, no, because you repeat the word ownership and it comes across to me that you read it. But yeah,
Okay, I'll have a little look at it though.
he was a Naval SEAL and it's like a bestseller, so you'll probably be interested in that.
Yeah,
Um,
okay.
yeah. So in terms of emotional challenges, what would you say is one emotional challenge that no one prepares footballers for?
Injury and the isolation that comes with that. When you can no longer contribute, you become a spare part. And as much as managers talk about keeping you involved, they've got so much pressure to ensure the team's performing that being injured, you become it's very much a spare part. So you do feel extremely isolated, and it can be a lonely place being in the gym when everyone else is going out to train. So it's definitely something that you're not prepared for, and you just have to go through it and hope you come out the other side relatively unscathed in that sense.
Mm. Besides communication, what non-sporting skill should every footballer work on?
Being comfortable, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, stepping outside that comfort zone. It's
That's a fair one. Yeah.
it's it's essential. And in any walk of life, I just think if you were able to do that, it's never going to feel nice, but what can grow from it is just really, really important.
Mm. And then one more before we wrap this up. Or another one also. What challenge did you face recently that's ultimately paid off for you?
I think at the start of last season, I was told being fifth choice, I wasn't really going to feature. And the only reason I stayed around at the football club was because my dad was really unwell. I was there with my brother at the time. Fast forward 2 months, and I was playing week in, week out on the team. We were keeping clean sheets regularly and really sitting, and so much so that although MK Dons were seen as below Stevenage at the time, but they come and off the back of the performance that we're putting in and put down a sort of a longer term contract that secured my future. Um, it was something that did work itself out. So going back to what you asked earlier on in terms of what do you wish you had known, you'll go on a journey that will be full of twists and turns, but just by having faith, and I believe now my dad's looking down on me, that path's mapped out and it will work itself out. So just have faith that you will get there eventually.
Mm. And then so I believe you're a parent. So my question here is basically, if your kids were to explain to their teacher in 10 years' time what their dad does, what would that be?
I'd like to think a foot in maybe a director of football within that line of work, but I'd also like to be, as I say, I'm co-founding a business at the moment in time that helps small and medium businesses grow. Um, Creating a players fund to help them invest into business as well. A bit like Gary Neville, I'd like to wear lots of different hats, and it wouldn't maybe just be one thing. They'd probably hone in on the fact that I'd still be in the football industry, but yeah, I'd like to think I'm maybe even offering mentoring services. There's lots of different things, and that's why I've probably gone on the journey. I have lots of different courses undertaken, just because I don't quite know exactly where I'll be in 10 years' time, but hopefully it'll all map itself out.
Mm. And the final question will be, what book has influenced you the most?
The Monk That Sold Its Ferrari,
Why?
probably because it's a lot of key takeaways, but it's something that I've recommended multiple times to lots of people. But and also it's just been a little bit more content, I think, within football because it's such a you're constantly in the public domain. People are sort of assessing you, analyzing you, expect you to drive fast cars and this sort of thing. It's you end up feeling like you've got to keep up with the Joneses in many ways, and you turn up with a car that's not a Mercedes or a BM, people are going to be looking down the nose on you in that sense. Life is, for me, that sort of thing wasn't important. We've got a beautiful family, and I'm very lucky in that sense. And they were the most important things. And that's those materialistic possessions I've not been, thankfully, as drawn to, and that possibly could be because of that book and how important and powerful that was in that sense.
Great. This is awesome. Thank you so much, Nathan, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And that's a wrap for this episode of Football Economy. If Nathan's story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on how you can step aside of your comfort zone if you're a footballer or an aspiring footballer. And remember, your identity is always bigger than your job title. Don't forget to subscribe for more conversations at the intersection of football and life. Until next time, take care.